The brothers Wisp. The brothers Wisp, brothers Wisp. The brothers Wisp. The brothers.
You're now listening to Greg. It's the Brothers Wisp. Let's take a ride.
Hey everybody, this is Greg with the Brothers Wisp, number 133. With us today, we got a full house, and barring any further technical issues, hopefully this podcast will go smooth. We'll see what happens. So, from Chicagoland over here to my right, pointing the right direction, we have Mikey Hammett.
Crap. I was trying to think of something else to say.
It's a great start. Crap. Just say it, Mike. Just say it. You know what you want to say.
Hey, how's it going?
There we are. All right. And then we also have Nick Arolano from not Chicagoland.
Hi, everybody.
Where are you at again? I can never remember the name of this place.
Right now I'm in Spring Valley, Illinois.
Illinois. Excellent.
Illinois.
Yeah. Noisy. It's noisy down there. And then we also have our Kiwi turned Aussie, Andrew Thrift.
Hey, people.
Who's pretending to be Alex Horne. I'm assuming most of the American listeners probably have no idea who that is, but you are definitely channeling Alex Horne right now. In the Horn section.
Thanks, mate.
My favorite shows, Taskmaster. He's the creator and co-host, I guess, of that. So there you are. You're feeling famous today, I hope. So let's get some of the little stuff out of the way really quick. So we have one new patron this go around, Bro Turner. That name is extremely familiar from way back. I just can't remember why, and I didn't research it because it just popped it in this morning.
He's based out of Boston.
Boston.
I know he's been around. Yeah, he's been doing the WISP stuff as long as I have. 15 years. I know there's been various internet or tech related articles that he's been a part of and whatnot. He was doing Boston before Starry started doing Boston, and Starry made a big scene a couple of years ago, and yet kind of you don't hear much about him anymore.
All right, rock and roll. Well, let's also get some of our Oh, no. While I'm thinking about it, patrons, you become a patron by going to patreon.com/brotherswisp. Throw some bones, you get access to the patron-only Slack. The Little Brothers Wisp Slack is what we call it. And a lot of great discourse happens in there. And some of the stuff we're going to talk about, Andrew dropped some spoilers in earlier so that we could all speculate ahead of time. And then he'll come on the show and actually do it diligence, or I'd rather do it justice, because we're going to make stuff up. But before we get to that, let's talk about some of our sponsors. I'm going to do tower coverage really quick. Go ahead.
One quick thing I wanted to kind of do. So earlier you were talking about technical stuff. I just wanted to point out that Tommy C. T-Cent sacrificed himself for this episode.
Threw himself into the volcano so that this podcast could live.
Yet he was here earlier, but due to some technical issues we're having, we had a limit as to the participants, and he bowed out. Technical
issues. Greg's Skype is jacked up. Let's just call it what it is. There you are.
Greg doesn't know how to computer.
I never claimed to be able to do that. So let's get the sponsors out of the way. TowerCoverage.com. Tower Coverage is your RF propagation system to empower your network, real-time data metrics, enable your coverage area, reaching your customer base, and more. The industry's best RF propagation mapping system allows website integration for customer sign-up and pre-qualification. Use this data to scientifically plan network expansion and help your WISP succeed. Get a free trial today at towercoverage.com. All right, who wants to go next?
Which ones have we done? I wasn't even paying attention. I was reading stuff. Tower coverage.
I did tower coverage. We still have the top two left.
All right. I'll do Sonar because it's the short one. Brought to you by Sonar, a scalable, intuitive, and comprehensive ISP billing and operational support system. Learn more at Sonar.software.
Awesome. So, Nick or Thrift, who wants to do a quick bit?
All
right. One of our sponsors is QuickBit, which is an indoor and outdoor 60 gigahertz kit that is just set it and forget it simple. Crazy feature set for the price with API, deployment tools, solid distance, up to 8 clients per hub. Be sure to check them out at, quickbit.com is the domain.
Yeah, KWIKBIT.com. All right. So let's jump in. while we have Thrift, we got to get the Thrifty related subject matter out of the way. So he brought it to our attention that there has been, I guess it's, people are always poking around in different version releases, and I guess somewhere in the version 7 release, they found some additional hardware names, right?
Yeah. So there's a bunch of things that have been found in there. Some guys are pretty crazy with the amount of time they have to go and dig into this stuff, but they found a few new product names inside one of the libraries, and there's a new product name of the CRS 504, the CRS 518, as well as a new model in the CRS 2000 series, which is a CRS 2116. So we've got no
CCR,
idea what
right?
these are. Oh, sorry, the CCR 2116. I typoed that and messed myself up there, but yeah, so we've got no real idea what these are. You can read into them from the model strings, but we're going to make it up as we go anyway for your entertainment. So you're probably aware there's a CRS 304 at the moment, which is a basically the same chipset as the CRS 326, but instead of having the 26 copper gigabit ports on there, they've just trimmed it down and used that bandwidth to allow 4 times 10 gigabit interfaces. So I'm guessing the CRS 504 is basically a version of that that's either got 25 gigabit ports or it's got the layer 3 version of that same chipset. So I'm not sure which it is. It could be either, but I'm guessing it's one of those. And the 518 is basically the new device that that Mikrotik launched. Well, the 318 is, sorry. The 318 is the net power. It's the device that's kind of a plastic enclosure with a massive heatsink on it. It can output power to 16 odd ports. So my guess is the 518 is a layer 3 or 2.5 gigabit version of that. Now, I'm picking that these are probably going to be layer 3 chipsets rather than anything else. And the reason for that is that version 7 has got the ability to put the forwarding information base into an external chipset. And why would they add that feature if they weren't planning on launching products that did layer 3 on an ASIC? So my pick is it's that, but I guess time will tell. What are your guys' thoughts on it?
First, I think you need to explain what you mean by layer 3, right? So, like, what advantage does that buy you?
So, a lot of wireless ISPs and ISPs in general are just using a switch to do forwarding of the traffic back to another router. By having the layer 3 functionality built into the switch itself, they don't need that secondary router. They can actually route inside the switch at wire speed. So the current CRS 3 series, most of them at least, are limited to basically doing layer 2 at wire speed, and then the layer 3 is severely restricted by the tiny little CPU that's in there. With a layer 3 ASIC, it means that they can forward at layer 3, the layer 3 traffic at wire speed. So if you've got a switch with 16 gigabit ports on it, all 16 ports are going to be able to route between each other and to an external port at wire speed. So there's some big advantages there. That means that you need less devices on a tower or in a POP. It's going to be faster. The latency is going to be more predictable. So yeah, it's going to make quite a nice solution. And I've actually seen a bunch of WISPs using Cisco 3750s inside cabinets for exactly this reason. And it's kind of hideous and they use a lot of power. So this is going to give them a solution to that that's going to hopefully use a lot less power and be more modern.
And since we're speculating, we're just throwing stuff out there. You're talking about wire speed routing, so you're going to offload that to the actual ASICs, the chips themselves. I had a couple of questions. One is, do you think there'll be NATing capabilities in there, or do you think it's really just going to be hardware routing?
There will be NATing capabilities because I know the chipsets support it, but to what scale, I'm not sure. I know some of the previous ones were limited to 12,000 entries, so I don't know what the newer chipsets are capable of, so something I'd need to look into.
I'm also curious about, so if you have Router OS offloading all the heavy lifting to the chipset itself, how are you going to be able to troubleshoot? So if, say, the chipset's having problems or something weird like that, do you think Router OS is going to be able to adequately pull that information and see what's going on?
Definitely. So it can change. If you say run a torch on it, what it will do is it will take the traffic out of the ASIC forwarding path and pump it through the processor temporarily until you finish the torch, which is how it works now. So yeah, they'll definitely be able to do that.
Depending on how much traffic's moving through there, could be a bad idea, right?
Oh yeah, it could be. That's something I've come across before helping ISPs actually is they're like, as soon as I run a torch, my router crashes. And it's like, yeah. So yeah, be careful with that one. The other product that was spotted in there was the CRS2116, and it's actually got the full product string in there. So it's a CRS2116-12G-4S+, which indicates that it has got 12 gigabit ports and 4 SFP plus connectors on it. So yeah, that'll be a nice little addition. Probably replacement for the CRS1009, but with 10 gig on it now. So, or more 10 gig. So it's quite a cool product. And the other product that we've known about for a while is the CCR2016-1G-12XS-2XQ. Now that's a bit of a mouthful, that one. So it's got 1 gigabit port on it, 12 25 gigabit ports, and 2 100 gigabit ports. So that's a bit of a beast. I've got absolutely no idea what the architecture of those devices are, but I'm pretty keen to find out.
And what's kind of interesting to me on those is that, like, 2016 is a smaller number than 2116.
That's right.
Yet the 2116 has the smaller number of ports. So it's like,
yeah,
historically, in this ECR series, the bigger the number, the more cores, the faster the box. So then what's the purpose in having a potentially weaker CPU with crap ton more port capabilities?
I looked this up a bit, and it just says that it's a reserved number in their product naming string, so it could just be a different variation of the same chip, or it could be a completely different architecture.
Okay.
It's pretty hard to tell. Now, because these start with a 2, and we've already seen the 2004 that's already in the marketplace, it's got an Annapurna Labs or a Amazon CPU. I can't imagine that these would have a different vendor for the CPU but still be a 2 series device. It's possible, but it's unlikely, so I'm guessing these are going to be Annapurna ARM-based as well.
So on the CRS switches, I know we're backpedaling a little bit. I'm just curious, if we're going to be doing routing in there, the first thing, I remember you telling me that that kiwis are notorious for this, that if you buy a box that can do everything, they're damn well going to try and run everything on it. So I'm just curious, do you think these CRSs, knowing a little bit about the chipset that you do you think they're going to be able to, pull in a BGP feed at the border? And I mean, if you put a 504 in there and it's got 10 gig ports, somebody's going to attempt it, right? Do you think these things are capable of handling it?
They will. Unlikely. I think there's going to be limited TCAM space in them. So yeah, they'll probably be able to hold like 40 to 70,000 routes. I'm just pulling a number out of my head here based on other switches. And that's it.
On the 300 series, the ones that do have layer 3 forwarding in them, per their wiki, 3 of them, the 326, 312, and 309, of course I know there's some subvariants of those, support 50 to 80, and then the CRS 317 supports 150 to 240.
Okay, so the CRS 317's the one that's truly designed for layer 3 out of those ones. So I'd say that the 5 series, if it is layer 3 capable, it'll be similar numbers to that.
And that's perfectly adequate for a tower router, really anything inside, right, that you're just trying to ISP your stuff with.
It is. So a lot of people are running PPPoE, so they might be reasonably limited by this because the switch chip's not going to terminate the PPP. It's going to have to pass that back to the main processor. But if you're running DHCP with option 82, this is going to be an absolute winner for you. Or if you're routing traffic between multiple backhaul links, which is pure layer 3, again, it's going to be wire speed. So yeah, there's a lot of products out there like Sonar and Splunk and various other ones that support DHCP. So when these products come out, if you need to do that, that would be the way to go.
Wicked.
And you get to run full 1500 byte frames as well, which is going to add a little bit of performance improvement.
Excellent. I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that these are going to be slightly more expensive than the predecessor, or than the previous products, the 300 series. But I know whenever they launched the 100, then the 200, there was a little jump, and then 200 to 300, there was a little jump. So I'm assuming it's not going to be incredible.
No, I'd assume that as well, but they've obviously got to pay for the increased bill of materials and all of the research and development that's gone into this.
I wonder if all the COVID shortages are going to bite into the price right now too.
Oh, eventually they will, yeah. Depends where the chips are coming from. So yeah, I'd say if these do turn out to be layer 3 switches, that they're going to be router OS version 7 only.
That means they would have to ship with 7 in them.
They would.
It,
Which might be why there's been so much effort put into version 7 recently. I mean, we've actually seen a release with proper layer 3 and MPLS in it.
Well, that begs the question, are they, on all products moving forward, basically internally said, hey, don't even bother with version 6 on this hardware. We're only looking at 7 moving forward. And I could see why that would put a lot of pressure on them internally. That makes sense.
That's how I would think, but I'm not Latvian, so...
Now I think that the 2016, just because it's it looks to be the same series as the 2004. I expect it to be treated very similarly. I'm assuming it's just a bigger version of the same thing. It will probably dual release on 6 and 7, although you can't on the 2004 you kind of see the limitations that 6 provides. So you probably wouldn't want to use it on 6, but I would think you could, shoot yourself in the foot with it if you wanted to.
That depends on the architecture. Like the CCR 2004 is basically running version 6 in like a 32-bit mode or a hypervisor kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And then it's got that Marvell PX chip, which is basically a big fat bridge where all the decisions are made by the operating system rather than by the ASIC. If they're going for a different model whereby they're using one of the other Marvell Prestera ASICs or a third-party ASIC, they may need version 7 out of the box, and I can't imagine them doing it any other way, so I suspect these may have version 7 on them or a requirement for version 7. But I've been proven wrong before. So, yeah,
So,
who knows?
Nick, I'm curious. You've been curiously quiet over there. I know you guys do a lot of like 317s at your tower to like a 4011. Is that right, to do routing? If you had the opportunity to replace all of that with one box, would you go for it?
Probably, especially if it's all fiber. One of the nice things about like the 2004, and I'm assuming the other ARM ones, is just the power draw as well. Because like they're pretty performant, but they don't have the same power requirements as like a 1036 or something. So a lot of the sites that the WISP does is like solar and battery only. So we're trying to save where we can on power, so every watt counts. So some of these ARM-based routers are less power draw, but lots of power.
Sure, yeah. And if you're needing to roll out licensed backhauls, those, there's no way about it. Those chew a lot of power.
100 watts.
So.
Oh, yeah.
That's if you can save 20, 30, 40 watts, whatever it is, on your router.
Equals more
really
uptime.
So I've got something here that says Thrifty-security. What's that? Who put that there?
I did.
Just in general, what do you think about security?
It's so simple.
Well, it's so I had as I had briefly talked about a bit on the last cast, I'm dealing with a bit of a security issue in one of the networks that I manage. Ransomware got to.
Ooh, saw that.
Don't do this. Do not use, and I didn't build it, so I can only take partial blame of not fixing it sooner. Do not use Windows as a file server for your infrastructure, especially if you're exporting it as iSCSI, NFS, whatever, to hypervisors. That's a very easy way to lose everything you have.
It's fine to use Windows as a file server. I mean, what else are you going to use? Using it as a block storage device? Yeah, probably not a good idea.
Yeah, and so, I'd kind of, messaged Thrift a little while ago. I was, knowing that he works for a security vendor and therefore must at least be somewhat security aware.
He's aware that it exists.
I just look into kind of, most WISPs as demonstrated by the number of people who have devices without firewalls and default passwords on the public internet, most WISPs are not going to be very security conscious. But there's only so much you can do for certain things. Infrastructure is infrastructure. You can firewall it off, but in my scenario, the device that caused the most pain wasn't reachable by the public internet. Some other way they got to it. So, something else in the infrastructure that is open to the internet got compromised.
Oh, yeah.
Which simple ACLs will not solve.
So I hear these stories a few times a week, Mike, unsurprisingly. And I've heard some real clangers. One I heard recently, there's a manufacturing operation that's been offline for about 6 weeks now. So their entire business is unable to actually manufacture the product. So there's several hundred staff that are basically sitting on their hands waiting to go. And this is not an uncommon thing. So a lot of people perceive security as being a firewall or an antivirus, but it's actually a lot more complicated than that now. People are actively targeting organizations as well as doing drive-bys, and they're using a whole bunch of different techniques. So your traditional antivirus in the situation that you're in is absolutely not going to cut it. A lot of the ransomware nowadays is toolkits where they can modify it to suit the target, and they'll modify it and send it to you, and your traditional antivirus is not going to detect that because enough of it will have changed that it won't pick it up with the signatures.
Cat and mouse.
Or if it does pick it up, it's too late. So the industry's really moved towards using things called EDR products. So things like, we've got one at the company I work for called 40 EDR, but there's also products from CrowdStrike and Carbon Black and a bunch of other ones, but they work in a completely different way whereby they monitor the Windows kernel typically, and they look at the behavior of the machine and they build a baseline. And then if programs start doing things outside of the baseline, especially to particular locations, they'll flag it and stop it from executing. And that stops the majority of the ransomware and malware that's out there. So this is kind of AV 2.0, I guess you'd call it. And a lot of the traditional vendors do like EPP products or traditional AV, they're really struggling to move over to this new kind of mindset. So that's why you're not seeing the ESETs and Symantec's and that kind of really going heavily down this road yet. I'm sure at some point they'll get there, but for now it's really kind of limited to people that are first party kind of EDR solutions. Yeah, so that's the ransomware side, but in general, security for WISPs and ISPs is pretty bad from what I've seen as well. Probably worse in the enterprise.
And so then low-hanging fruit is talked about often enough in the Facebook and various other groups. ACLs on your infrastructure to only permit certain management subnets or IPs. And then, drop everything else. I always added, accept ICMP and stuff like that. So I want that to work. But so that's talked about quite a lot. But, what's the next, what's the next step that someone's like, okay, I set up all these ACLs, maybe not all the way to the ransomware, solution, but what's the next step that somebody could do that's wanting?
So, protecting infrastructure, easy ones are set up a centralized radius server with a database of your admin users, point all your devices at it so that they need users to log in with a radius authenticated account. That solves a couple of problems. One, it means that all your passwords are controlled centrally. The other one is that it means you can have individual accounts per user and you can audit their behavior and what they're doing. You can also audit all the login events to see who's logged in. It means that if an employee leaves, you're able to disable their account and they're no longer able to get into any of your core infrastructure. So that's one basic one that I'd recommend. Now you can do that with a bunch of products. You can even just use a Windows Active Directory server and fire up Radius on it, or you can probably do it inside your Sonar or Splunk as well, I imagine. That's a good way to go. The other one is to set up a solution like Splunk or Graylog to log all of the security events from your router, and actually write some rules to map out histograms and what's happening, and so you can see trends. And if things are happening outside of the trend that are related to logins or packet flows, then you've probably got a problem. So those are simple things that you can set up for low or no cost that are going to make a big difference to your security posture on the infrastructure side.
From talking to a lot of our customers, I'm so like in the automation world, I came into it looking at network stuff, but I've quickly transitioned to mostly talking about security, which is ironic because, every network engineer feels like their job is to connect people, and every security engineer is to, annoy people, I guess. It's actually, they're not counter to each other. They really should work together. But from talking to a lot of the security folks, they're saying that, it's not necessarily the infrastructure you have to worry about, it's the people inside. That's where
PEBKAC.
Yeah, it's where all of these vulnerabilities come from. And particularly, most of these folks are having problems with phishing, right? They'll get a phishing email. A user will click on something, and then, their machine's compromised, and then it just goes from there, and it spreads from there. Now that a lot of folks are working from home remotely, they're using their own machines, bring your own device sort of stuff. And at some point, they're probably going to VPN in. Most places don't have everything in the cloud that you can just hit through a browser or something like, so there's going to be kind of a soft underbelly that theoretically folks can get access to. So from talking to at least to real security professionals, not just ones that play it on TV, kind of like me, it seems like your people are the weakest link.
That's
for sure
the case.
I
know from our perspective, a lot of our products, we've had to modify them since COVID hit to do things like notify you if people are VPNing in from outside the regions they should, so that you can easily spot hackers, because quite often what they'll do is they'll compromise VPN credentials, and you'll see them log in from some country that's way out of your remit, e.g. Russia or somewhere, or the Ukraine is the common one. And if you can see that, you can at least head it off before it becomes too big of a problem.
Yeah, so step one, the bare minimum is ACLs. But then you have to layer monitoring and syslog capturing, and you have to understand that these people that are hacking sometimes spend 6 months, 8 months working on an exploit, and then it eventually gets patched. But people have to accept that if somebody's going to target your infrastructure, depending on who's going after you or what they're doing, they're probably going to have some way to get in. So every time something happens, it needs to be you need to be able to audit your logs. So I know a lot of people who set up this infrastructure, but they don't really look at it. It's like, they've got monitoring, but what good is the syslog if you're not actually inspecting logs? And so, for example, there's certain things like if somebody incorrectly logs into any piece of infrastructure, I get a Discord message of the source IP of who tried to log in, the username that was attempted, what service they tried to log into. And as soon as that stuff comes in, you got to try to figure out where it's coming from, and is that okay? Or did they get in a way that you didn't expect? And you have to constantly be checking and auditing these things. And then the other important thing is there's going to be compromises and exploits at some point. You can't protect from everything, especially when you can't patch your systems to the newest version sometimes. That's really common in the WISP space. So you have to have good backups, and backups that are on their own separate network that are more, I guess, locked down, because as long as you've got good backups, you could always recover. But yeah, I think the most important thing is get good systems in place. Every time something does happen, you need to probably take some time to look at as much information as you have available to you and try to figure out how to mitigate something similar like that from happening again. Otherwise, you're just going to keep getting exploited. Everything should be a learning experience. A lot of people, they just throw money at it. Somebody comes in and fixes it, but they don't improve their practices, and then it happens again. Like, I know somebody who their WISP got exploited by the Ubiquity worm 3 times before they finally start, and that thing moves quick, and they had to go through and run a couple command line commands on all the radios to fix it again, but then it happened again. And then it happened one more time, and then it's like, okay, now it's time to, how do we stop this from happening? But it needs to be like that.
I've seen that as well. There was that one where Mikrotik routers were getting hacked and they were leaving little traces on the file system. I saw ISPs go through that 3 or 4 times as well because they just refused to actually block it at the edge.
Or that one where they were able to extract the password database from the Mikrotiks, and people would upgrade, but they wouldn't change the password.
They get right back in.
That's right.
Yeah, so they just get right back in. Ugh. But something you were talking about, Nick, was that you were logging, people attempting to log in, and then you'd get an alert on that. What we also did too is, all of our equipment would have a backup account, right? Because central authentication is great until that piece of network equipment breaks.
Right.
So you still have to have
Exactly
a backup account. And so we had logging so that anybody that logged in with a backup account, we'd get alerted too. So then, you'd ring the shame bell, and you'd have, everybody would say, yeah, that was me. I was doing blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I think it's important to look at those local. I mean, it's seemingly normal activity. If it goes outside of a window or off normal, you need to be able to see that as well. So that was a good one.
And I think a lot of us are going to have a hard time, narrowing down, what is normal and what is not. How do I avoid alert overload? I've been good at building monitoring systems and things. And it's like, okay, I built this out. Now what do I do with it?
Yeah, so
like I'm looking at it like, I have a dashboard, but what do I put on the dashboard? How do I do this? It's just like, so then I don't do anything because it's like, I don't know. I built it and I'll figure it out later.
Well, that's an incremental process because if you don't ever look at it, then you're always going to get compromised. You have to think about like what piece of information did I have available to me that I needed to know immediately. So with syslog parsing, you can capture anything that happens in a log anywhere on any system. So if something happens that is completely abnormal, you should sit down and maybe make a list for yourself. Like if any of these things happen on my network, I want to know immediately, and I need to put it in some kind of escalation system. Like it goes in this Discord channel or whatever messenger of choice. This will alert me even out of business hours. Like once you have that data, then you need to figure out like how do I want this delivered to me? And what stuff is mission critical? What stuff can I look at later? And if you never do that, then you might as well not have the monitoring system at all, and you're just going to keep getting hit. One of the benefits of a lot of the security vendors, like Sophos and all the others, just throwing another vendor out there, they have a lot of stuff where if a customer gets compromised, it updates their signature list and it gets pushed out to all of the other customers so that everybody's kind of patched, like the one person kind of took the hit for the greater good. And that's kind of what you have to do as a person is look at what information you have, what information you didn't have during the incident, and how you can do better on the next iteration. And I feel like most people don't do that, or at least the people that are complaining about all these hacking events. Like you got to try, and it's a constant evolving thing. Like for example, on the WISP, we've had a few things that FastNetmon caught, and then yesterday I had a single HTTP packet from thousands of hosts on Amazon that was toppling the CCR. So there was like, I think by the end of the day, it was like 1.8 billion packets and over 500 gigs of just HTTP pings. So it's not something that would get caught necessarily by FastNetmon, specifically the IP they were hitting. So like when stuff like that happens, you got to like jump in real quick and look at Torch and see like what's actually happening. And then you go, how do I stop this from happening again? Or how do I get alerted that this similar thing is happening again so I can jump on this faster? And it's always like that. Just cat and mouse.
You need to have response plans for the things that are going to happen commonly, like denial of services and things like that, as well as security events and the unknowns as well.
Yeah, for sure. Having a plan in place can go a long way. Instead of just sitting there freaking out, actually having something, okay, well, let's start at step 1, step 2, step 3, because, it takes a while, but you eventually get used to that stuff. But when it first starts happening,
you just got to start.
You go into fight or flight mode, and all the blood leaves your brain, and the one place where you really need it, and it gets hard to kind of concentrate and think. So that's tough. One thing you were talking about though, that was somewhat interesting to me is I'm rebuilding our security workshop here. So we're doing some kind of interesting stuff where we're allowing people like for our Ansible workshops. So that's all. It's turned out to be a big part of my job is I lead workshops and walk people through like these 6-hour classes of doing different stuff. But we're trying to make it so that you can do some self-service ones. So I'm like recording like LinkedIn style videos of me, doing all that stuff and walk. So, but anyway, to make it fit in our lab, right, I'm kind of reworking our security one. And I've been using IBM QRadar. It's their SIEM product, and they have a community edition. That's a little appliance that you just download the OVA for free. And it's the it's the real product. They've just hamstrung it a little bit. So you've got all the bells and whistles. I think it just only supports like 50 messages per second, right? So, which is still pretty substantial, so there's just some limitations in there. But the interesting thing about, and they call it SIEMs, but it's spelled SIEM. I want to call that a SIEM. But yeah, somebody told me that.
Well, it depends where you're from.
They told me I would get laughed at if I said that. So I gotta say SIEM. But yeah, so the idea with that is it supports a lot of different vendors' products. And so as those log messages comes in, rather as they start coming in, they recognize the vendor product and they say, oh, I know exactly what this format is. And it's got a lot of things in there for exploits, or, it looks like you're under attack for this or that, right? It's already got kind of those signatures in there that you're talking about.
Indicators of compromise.
And it knows what anomalous things are, like what those anomalous traffics or events. It kind of has an idea of all that stuff. So you don't have to invent the wheel, right? Like if I'm pointing, 100 different devices from 40 different vendors, I don't have to try and figure out which messages are important necessarily. It's going to, at first it's going to be alerting on a lot of stuff. And that's where you have to kind of go in there and do some triage and figure out what's important, what's not, set your levels for everything. Yeah. But just, it gets you halfway there because it knows what it's looking at and it's got a good idea of what's, like you said, an indicator of compromise. So that kind of thing can go a long way. I know the community edition, they say it's really designed for people wanting to just test, or you want to build an application and you want to test in that, you want to simulate some stuff. But I think there's some other SIEMs that have open source versions. I'm not sure how feature rich they are as far as signatures that are rather vendors that they support log wise and all that stuff. And everybody's a little bit different, but I would say take a look at that too. It's not as scary or as intimidating as you would think for most of them that I've seen so far.
Yeah, just for a lot of the people that are listening, if you're running Mikrotik, there is actually a plugin for Splunk that's designed for Mikrotik, and there's a big support forum on the Mikrotik forums for it. So that would be a good place to start. I believe you can run Splunk up to a certain log capacity for free. So if you just want to have a taste of it, just like QRadar, you can go and have a look at that, and it's well supported. Splunk's
got a lot of really... So Splunk they acquired... I don't remember who they acquired, but they have a SOAR now. Splunk Phantom is what they call it. And so a SOAR is like, it does the exact same stuff, only it's got an automation kind of capability built in. So when it sees an event, it can actually kick off some scripts or various things like that. And there's a lot of community support. So as somebody figures something out, they put it up in the community and you could grab it and pull it in too. Or you can plug in an automation platform like Ansible, which is the reason I fart with it a lot, because they've got really good connectors for Ansible. So if you see an event, you can call your automation platform and have it do quite literally anything in response to that. So I think there's a lot of tools, but it's one of those things. It's like, where do I find the time? And, as you grow, it's, can you afford not to find the time?
Right.
That's always the problem for wireless ISPs. You've got limited resources, and it's one of those things where you either need to make the time or do it from the start. So if you're just starting out and you do this as part of your initial build-up, then you're going to have the systems in place. But if you're down the track and you've got a few thousand users and not enough time, it becomes
well, even
much
then,
harder.
If you have a 3,000 users and you turn this stuff on, how do you know what's normal and what's not with that many people on your network?
That's why, especially with WISPs, there's not, I guess depending, sometimes there's not a ton of complexity on the configuration side. So it's kind of worth it to go at least try the automation path a little bit, because, in a perfect world, everyone should probably have some sort of zero trust model where You don't trust anything inside or outside of your network, and by default, you block everything possible, and you explicitly whitelist the things that you care about. And doing configuration backups is one thing, but getting to the point where you can do configuration generation from a central source of truth. If something gets hit, it's not a huge deal because you just put in a new box, you provision it. So I think more people need to at least explore that option. And if they decide this isn't something we don't have the manpower to do, they should probably look commercially for products. A lot of this stuff isn't that hard to do, but that I guess that depends on the person's experience. A lot of people don't like writing regular expression matching stuff. That kind of sucks. But there are products. So, I mean, just because it's hard doesn't mean you shouldn't look at a commercial option. Because most of these things can be mitigated if you have automation systems in place. Something happens,
That's
you
right.
just blow it out, you spin it back up. It's not a huge deal. Yeah.
And talking about resourcing and not enough time for ISPs and WISP in particular, this can really save you a huge amount of time. It might mean you don't need to hire that new guy. You might be able to do it yourself and get more time to spend on security.
And when you talk about the problem existing between the chair or the keyboard, there's people that are a doorway for exploits to come into the network because of clicking the wrong link or doing whatever. But also when stuff does hit the fan, it's very common, especially in small, less professional environments, for people to deny what they did or didn't do, which causes more problem for the organization if you don't have logging. Because if you don't even know who did it around what time, you're going to spend so much time just trying to figure out like where this even entered the system. So getting to the point where you have some sort of automation in place where everyone's deploying configurations the same way, everything is audited and logged, and as soon as you can make things less of a big deal because you can just redeploy on a new piece of hardware, then it's a lot easier for people to not throw critical thinking out the window and deny what they did or didn't do. Because I know a couple WISPs who have had issues like this where they've had one of the entire edges of their network just offline for 24, 48 hours straight, just because they were so disorganized. They didn't expect it. People weren't acknowledging like what piece they played into causing the outage, and it doesn't help anybody.
It comes down to culture as well. If you've got a culture of berating people when they make a mistake, these are the rewards you're going to reap. I think.
Yeah, a blame game never solves anything.
It's like who cares? We just need to know how it started, and then figure out how to fix it.
Yeah,
worry about that later.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I don't know. The security stuff. It's so. In one of our slide decks, there's this slide in there that talks about how it's this research. I can't even remember which it was, Gartner or Forrester or somebody like that, but they did some research and they said that like year on year attacks are increasing by I think 65%, and it's taking longer to actually resolve the additional increased attacks. And they were saying that the average security team, like at a Fortune 500 company, established security team, they're only able to look at, birth to death about 5% of their alerts that come in every day. And I was kind of astounded by that. And I was talking to a couple of security guys, and they said, you know what, if you're getting the top 5%, you're actually probably doing pretty good. And that was tripping me out. Yeah. But the report said that number two reason for that was lack of automation and orchestration in their environment, right? As people go through these incidents, they have to click through no less than 5 different GUIs on average to, to first find the incident, to research, to, all the various tools they're going through. They said, what was number 3 reason? Oh, well, no, I can't remember what number 3 reason was, but number 1 was actually lack of skilled security professionals. And to me, if you ask me, that's not the kind of problem you can throw bodies at, right? If the attacks are increasing by 65% every year, adding more humans is not the answer, right? It's automation, having something that's going to perform, because when you start talking to these guys, they perform the same set of tasks every single time, right?
Automate.
Something comes in, same. Yeah, and it's not about decreasing the number of staff you have. It's about helping the staff you have survive, right? Keep their heads above water. So,
and one of the things that is even worse about this whole situation is a lot of the large companies don't even bother paying to do security audits. Like they get a compromise, they lose data, and they just pay the fines because it costs them less money for that approach than doing semi or annual security audits. And so it's giving people less work in security jobs, and it's just a whole circle of chaos. Obviously, these attacks and exploits are very profitable for, the exploiter or the hacker, but it's like they just throw their hands up in the air. Yeah, we lost the data. We're sorry. We're going to pay the fines, and we're not going to improve the practices.
Well, I mean, isn't that what came out of the Yahoo hacks? Is that they, like the security guys there said, hey, we've been telling them for years that we need to fix all this stuff. And they just wouldn't give us the budget because it literally was cheaper for them to just pay the fines than to pay the security professionals. But from what I understand, that's more of a U.S. problem than an international. Isn't there like more repercussions over in the EU if you have these
probably
kind
with
of
GDPR stuff, like depending on what kind of data is leaked, and I'm not really sure, but
I'm not sure about
and it's hard
Australia
now
or
because
New Zealand either.
if you just think about just the raw amount of data now compared to years ago, it's even more compelling to go automation, AI driven software type systems, because it's getting to the point where humans can no longer process this stuff even if they wanted to. Like just thinking about when we talked about this a few casts ago when we were talking about Facebook, just how do you audit these guys when they've got more data than you could even fathom coming in every minute, every second into their systems? Like, how do you keep on top of that? How do you capture enough logging to even be effective?
So that brings me on to something that we do internally. As a security vendor, we've got a team of 300 people in Ottawa that are constantly analyzing threats. But in front of them, we've got a huge machine learning array that basically takes all the threat detection responses and correlates them and matches them up and filters it out before it goes to the threat analysts. So that's happening quite a lot in the industry, and we actually share that information with other security vendors too.
That's awesome.
So that's already happening in the marketplace, and NVIDIA are making lots of money off of it.
They're the ones running the GPU clusters or whatever.
They are.
Wow.
It's pretty amazing use of technology, though, and
well, hopefully that's
makes the threat intel a lot better.
It's more collaborative going forward than it has been. I know a lot of people want to keep their proprietary systems in place, but this is becoming a problem where people have to kind of work together to come up with some sort of standardized way to handle all this stuff. Because as technology increases, the attacks are going to get worse. So we kind of have to do what we can if you're in those industries to kind of help other vendors to kind of attack this all together.
Yeah, because a lot of the bad actors out there have no problems open sourcing their attack frameworks and stuff, right? So they're already working collaboratively.
Yeah. Yeah, so one thing to remember is a lot of these guys are doing this commercially. It is their job. It's how they make their living. And so they're going to employ multiple different ways to get into your organization, especially if you're targeted. A lot of them are just doing drive-bys. They'll look for devices they know have got exploits, valid exploits, and they'll break in that way. But nowadays we're seeing more and more targeted attacks. Like they'll choose healthcare and they'll go after private hospitals, or they'll choose private education. They'll go after those, try and get ransomware in there, steal research data. You name it, it's becoming much more wild out there. Yeah. Mine Bitcoin on your HPC clusters.
Yeah, I hear that's finally becoming profitable again to mine your own stuff. Of course, ironically, you can't buy video cards right now to do any of the GPU processing. So, chicken and egg problem. Maybe that's helped increase the price that it's so hard to mine for that stuff now.
I know there's a lot of us out there that think, well, all this security stuff is hard. I just won't have systems. I know some people were just like, they use UISP for their billing. They use UNMS, or no, I guess UISP is for their network monitoring. So they have something off in the cloud that's watching all their bits. They don't do email. They don't so many of them that don't own a single server. But
That's great. These are usually the same guys that run huge layer 2 broadcast domains across their entire network because everything's bridged. But at the end of the day, no matter how much you push into the cloud, you've got to protect the infrastructure. And if you're not doing that, it's going to get hacked very quickly. And I mean, I'm on a bunch of the WISP groups, and it's a common thing that comes up. People who are doing that get hacked.
And, you know, to clarify as well, UISP is not a good management or monitoring platform. Like, first of all, you can't manage configuration of equipment. The polling interval is too lengthy in between, so the graphs aren't that useful. I mean, if you just look at the bandwidth consumption, if you've got a sizable network, like it's pulling 30, 40, 50 megabits per second sustained 24/7, just dumping crap into UISP. And so the WebSocket connections drop and lots of false positives. Like, people need to have their own systems on net, you know, because it's fine and dandy if they can connect out to the internet, but you need something to monitor and manage, like, the paths on inside your network and your network's perspective to the outside and outside in. And so just, you know, throwing your hands up in the air to a platform that may or may not exist in a couple years, hosted in an environment you cannot control. I mean, I see stuff like that all the time where it's like, well, the service was down for a whole day, so now you have no systems, even though you didn't own it.
And especially if you're not paying for
It's
it,
free.
then how can you expect any level of service, right?
And not quite as bad, but are all the guys that just, well, I'm gonna do stuff, but I'm just gonna put it all into AWS. It's like, okay, well, but just because they're afraid of being a sysadmin, it's like, well, but you still have to be a sysadmin,
Right.
and now it's slightly harder because it's not even your infrastructure hardware that it's sitting on. Now you have to figure out how to protect your stuff inside Amazon, because you sure bet that there's probably more people targeting AWS, Azure, GCP than there are people targeting your customer subnets.
And that's definitely the case because they know how much stuff is in the cloud now. It makes it a nice big target. They don't have to distribute their targets out as much as they used to.
So you still have to learn how to do this. You still have to do this. It's not something that you could. I mean, you can outsource it. You can outsource it to somebody else who that is their job, be it consultants or whatever. But the work still has to be done.
And
Some of these WISPs, they don't think about how many days can you go without being able to deliver service if something does happen. Like, is your business going to go under? Which most WISPs, I think, that are shoestring budget, like, you can invest in an employee to learn that stuff and help you implement that stuff. You can pay a consultant. But what is the cost of, let's say, 2-3 days downtime for something that you can't really diagnose because you didn't put any effort at all into that? I feel like a lot of companies that deal with these problems would probably have to close shop. So is that worth, investing the time? Like, there is time that can be made for these types of things, especially if you think about what it's going to save you. But there's tons of learning material out there. There's so many video sites with certification paths. Like, if you just allocate a little bit of subscription money, you could get somebody competent enough to at least manage a system that you pay a consultant to set up.
Yeah. I've seen this before, kind of the glazed over look on people's face, when you're showing them a demonstration. I'm sure Andrew's done this. You're showing them a demonstration of your product and all of these amazing things that they say, hey, can you show me how this stuff works? And then they just, they get lost because it just feels so overwhelming, right? And so something I try and reiterate is, how do you eat an elephant? You do it one bite at a time, right? You do one little thing. So just set a schedule for yourself. Like, for this 2 weeks, I'm going to do this one little thing. And then the next 2 weeks, I'm going to do this. And then, right? So if you just have small, little, steady progress, you'll get there, right? I mean, I know we can't all dedicate just a month or two to just turn everything else off and study this stuff. But you can do something, and that's what you have to do. Don't just get paralyzed.
You can hire an employee.
Yeah, for sure.
Hire a guy and be like, hey, your job is to learn this.
Yeah.
Well, actually, that's not as simple as one may think. We ended up interviewing for a sysadmin type position. We ended up interviewing probably about 60 people. One guy hit it out of the park. We gave him an offer. He accepted. Some back and forth. He ended up going somewhere else. Second place person, a third of the skill of the first place person. And it's just like, and it's not like it was offering, shambles for pay. I mean, it's a rural area offering up to 80 grand, all depending on experience. And there was crap for applicants. So also it's like, hire somebody to do it. Well, you got to find somebody.
My experience is that a lot of more older, more experienced sysadmins actually don't care about security. They just want to make the thing work. So you generally got to find younger guys that are interested in this, or guys that are specifically targeted around security. I mean, I've worked with guys that have been quite senior sysadmins who have literally said, "Security is not my job."
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
You got to look for the guys with tattoos, visible tattoos. That's your security guy. I don't know why it is, but every security guy I ever meet.
That's pretty accurate.
With a hoodie on.
That's like rites of passage.
If they've got the right attitude and they're technical enough, a lot of people they could learn it. You just get them a subscription to like Pluralsight or LinkedIn Learning and be like, hey, learn this new thing and see what we can do. And some people don't realize that maybe all you need is a slightly technical employee, and then you have them work directly with a consultant to supplement what they don't know, or at least to get the setup in place. Like there's always an option. But everybody wants, perfection or someone to come in and fix the things that they've broken over the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And it never works out that way. But as long as you start and try and take, one step at a time, one bite at a time, and don't bring in more elephants. Wait till the first one's finished. A lot of people do that too. Bring in 4 elephants to try to bypass that rule there.
It's a buffet. There's an old business saying that I'm sure it's way older than I am, but it's like two guys at a business are talking, and one guy says, can we afford to invest in our people and send them to training and stuff like that because they're just going to get really smart and then leave us? And the other guy says, can we afford to have them not go to training and stay? I think at some point you just have to realize that if you invest in people, you treat them right, they might leave, but also statistically, it shows that they're more likely to stay and be happier as employees. So
that's right.
It's definitely worth putting some money and time and some of your energy into it for sure.
Yeah, sometimes the hard part is just standing up the infrastructure. Once it's up, though, you can get consulting, especially if you go with tools, whether it's open source or commercial, that have paid support. As long as you know, this tool that we put in, we have a commercial support license. So I know I can call this guy to help me troubleshoot this piece. And I know this little vendor over here, I pay for a support contract. So if anything happens, if you lose the employee, if they leave, it's already set up. And you have avenues to get support. And some people don't even think about that. It's like, oh, well, this is free and cheap, but they don't have commercial support available to you if you need it. So you might want to look at a different product, even if it's more expensive, but you always have that emergency. If something happens, you have someone to call that'll help you with the system.
That makes me laugh because that's the whole reason I have a job. Red Hat takes open source products and makes them enterprise ready, and then gives you support. So, yeah.
That's right. So, next topic that's semi-related. I noticed someone put on here they're planning to use PFSense as their workshop firewall.
That's me. Yeah. The workshop we use now spins up checkpoint firewall, which if you spin that up in the cloud, it requires 32 gigs of RAM. So it's very resource heavy. And then they have a Windows-based GUI, so you have to spin up a Windows client to be able to get to the GUI. So for the rewrite of the workshop, we're just going to use PFSense, which is open source, and it's actually got a lot of really good Ansible modules. So I can spin that up and we can automate against it. Really, we're not doing rocket science in the workshop. It's really just watching the gears turn. So you don't have to be a guru on any of these products or anything. And I think they went with Checkpoint before because it's odds on some of those customers had seen it. We could have just as likely used Fortinet or I don't know, really
Only
Palo
you need
Alto,
somebody.
yeah, anybody else. I know my brain locked solid there for a second. But yeah, any of the security vendors. But trying to go open source because most of the open source stuff runs really light. I think that VM only requires like a gig of RAM, I think. So, when I'm spinning up 40 workshops, it's not going to crater our lab that we have. Because that's, it's funny. We were doing everything in AWS, so all of our workshops would get spun up there and stuff. And we've, I think, I'm probably not supposed to talk about it, but there was a astronomical bill associated with that. So we built a lab in a data center, and the bill is, it's not even a tenth of what it was. It is like a tiny little fraction of what it was in the cloud for us to spin all that stuff up and maintain it. So it's just kind of taking the workshops that we have now, kind of retooling them a little bit to work a little bit more efficiently in the lab.
Very cool.
So I'm going to work through a series of connecting the dots here. So who do you work for?
I work for Red Hat.
Okay. Who owns Red
IBM.
Hat? Okay. And you were using AWS,
Right.
which is not an IBM product service. Have you? Actually, I forgot. I was totally blanked on the name.
Soft layer.
Yeah, have you ever heard of a company called SoftLayer? Would that not have made more sense? Obviously it's not your call, but it's like,
It's a big company, Mike, and I'm sure Red Hat's pretty much a going concern within IBM. So
Well,
they kind of
the
got their
AWS
own
thing
remit.
AWS is kind of
that and for one, that was pre IBM, yeah, and then two, the vast majority of our customers are going to be using that, right? So it's going to be something they're familiar with, especially if you're trying to emulate environments and show them things. They want to see you do stuff against the things that they have in their shop. So
and the things that you can do in AWS between API gateway and their global CDN and their caching service, and there's probably like 70, 100 plus services at this point in there.
Oh, it's
a
great.
magical place.
it's great, but it's expensive for what we do.
Yeah.
in 2018, SoftLayer was renamed to IBM Cloud. So it doesn't even have someone else's name on it now. It's their baby.
Cloud.
Yeah, I know a few people who their bread and butter is selling like PFSense firewalls with Suricata installed, which is like an IDS IPS plugin. Just slap a couple plugins in there and it's solid. Like most VPN technologies, you just slap a plugin on it. Works pretty well. And even their hardware appliances that they sell, the small ones, are
NetGates
pretty
or
cheap.
whatever.
Yeah. Apparently they're
that's
pretty
one.
performant and they're pretty cost effective. You could obviously put on your own hardware, but a lot of people put like sometimes Pi-hole like all installed together with it with Suricata, and it does like the 90% for small businesses, so it's pretty popular.
Yeah, I was looking. I was like, so Jimmy's obviously the keeper of all that stuff, and I was like, do you think we should use Mikrotik as the firewall? We could just spin up an CHR, and he goes, no, let's not do that, because PFSense, it's all idempotent stuff, so it actually works the way an API should work and all that stuff, and configurations can be, you can have a source of truth and just basically tell your automation, make sure that the configuration over here matches your source of truth. So it's kind of the way you want it to be when you're trying to demonstrate automation in a workshop.
Well, hey, maybe with the REST API, it'll be easier if all the data is standardized.
Maybe if they
Maybe you'll be
retool
able
it.
to-
Yeah, needs to be retooled for sure.
But version 7, they could do it. They've got the time and inclination, hopefully.
So there is a REST API, but it really just looks like a thin layer over what was already there.
I would hope, with their recent work with Latvian Telecom, that maybe they'll push them in this sort of direction, because I can't imagine they wouldn't want that kind of capability in an API. It seems like most of the guys in our telco arm, That's the products that they're using is exactly that. You define a source of truth in a file, and the automation pushes it to that hardware, whatever vendor it is. So I would hope Mikrotik would get pushed into that direction as well.
I mean, you could totally do it with scripts, but it's gnarly.
Oh,
I'm doing that right now. If there's like a whole template engine that has all these checks in there for me and stuff, and it was pretty gnarly. But it works.
Jimmy wrote a parser for Mikrotik for use in our automation stuff in our workshop. So we do everything infrastructure as code. So whenever somebody wants to make a firewall update, they go into the GitLab server, they open up the firewall file, and they make their additions in there. As soon as they save it, it calls a webhook, calls the automation platform. The automation platform connects in, pulls the running config from the Mikrotik, and then it has to parse it. And then we have a script that first it looks, is there anything in here that shouldn't be in here? If there is, okay, get rid of it. Now take a look. Is there anything in the configuration file that we've created that needs to be there? Okay, there is. All right, go ahead and add it. So it's just kind of it's a lot of extra hurdles you got to jump through, and a lot of extra work you got to put in, as opposed to just say, hey, does it look like this? No, make it that way. Okay, done. So I would much prefer that.
Have you looked at the new REST API?
I haven't dug into it too much.
I'm sure you could provide some good feedback on it, Greg.
I mean, I think I don't know. I'm just a nobody. They're not gonna listen to me.
I just looked for, given, kind of on the, topic of, they seem to have a sweetheart for LMT, Latvian Telecom. I was like, well, see if I can find him on LinkedIn. Do I have any connections? Because if that's how you want Micro to do something, you got to get LMT to want it.
I think we made this joke.
And I don't have any. Yeah, but I never actually went through and looked it up. So I don't have any first, what do they call it? First layer, first connections.
Got some work to do
but
then.
I do have six second degree connections to LMT to employees on LinkedIn. So maybe I gotta start asking for some introductions. They just start asking for some introductions. Hey, this guy, and see if I can, packet core engineer, network development engineer, Those sound like important people. So maybe I start hitting some of them up. Hey, make an introduction. I gotta talk to them.
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of standardized formats for configs. They could just take a convention and follow it, and problem solved. So maybe add some telemetry in there, streaming telemetry. That would be nice.
Oh yeah, definitely would be. The interesting thing with the streaming telemetry is I've tried to make a case to Mikrotik in the past for that, because they're obviously streaming telemetry from the router to Winbox.
Yeah.
How much of a stretch is it to stream it via gRPC or some other format to a external service? I don't think it would be that hard for them, but I'm not sure that they understood the use case. So.
Just write some protobufs.
Streaming's. I guess I'll paying on how long ago it was. Streaming's just getting more common, more popular. So sooner or later, the use case will be evident in that. Well, gee, everybody else does it. Now that doesn't mean it gets done, but
yeah, it's another one of those situations who are Mikrotik's competitors. Yeah. So the competitors are almost non-existent. So
yeah, you asked that, and I was thinking maybe like Zyxel or something. I don't who. Yeah,
Zyxel, yeah.
I don't even really know.
It's a hard one. For SMB or CPEs and that sort of thing, they've got plenty of competitors, but in that WISP router space, I mean, Ubiquity had a crack at it, but they don't seem to have really followed through. So I don't know who their competitors are. I know the routers that I see out there are basically Mikrotik, Juniper, and Cisco, and those guys are a lot bigger than Mikrotik. So, yeah. And they both do telemetry. So
but Mikrotik have been dipping their toes into other pools. All this stuff with LMT. That's a whole new market. That's not. There's very little Venn diagram between, building, this LTE infrastructure, building, those. I think they were just rebadging someone else's base stations, but that or all the 5G stuff they're getting involved with, that part of the Venn diagram is eventually going to overlap with people that want that stuff, and so when you've got someone building that out, on that gear, it's like, well, we need this in router OS, and all of a sudden, it's going to be one of those whales that makes them do it, not any of the WISPs. And then, but all of us will ride along because, they're not going to make a special edition router OS. They'll just throw it in with everything else. And, okay, all you plebes get it now.
I mean, telemetry is one thing because it's probably a little bit more complicated and there might be some security implications that have to look at. But being able to just dump their config in a standardized format, I don't think is too much to ask for. So I don't know if they listen.
You mean via the API?
Well, any method, as long as you can get it in some sort of standardized format that's not a big text blob that you could easily parse, match against, merge, and push the config back in the same format. As long as it's just not a big string that you have to parse or diff against. If it was some sort of structured, some sort of structured collection for whatever you're returning, whether it's from the actual API or it's, through whatever the web services that they're using. Just some sort of structured
If
data.
only there were multiple standards.
Like JSON or
like everything else they do, read an RFC, implement some stuff to an RFC.
That'd be baller. Something that popped in my head the other day. Well, actually, it popped up on the Slack is we were talking about Bufferbloat and FQ Codal. Right, so you have FQ Codal and Cake, which version 7 supports now, right? And it was exactly how does Bufferbloat work and how does that affect people? I saw, what's that guy's name? It's Dave Tot. There's some umlauts over his A. I'm not sure exactly how to say that. But he's the guy.
He's the Bufferbloat guy.
He's like the Bufferbloat guy. But he put out a YouTube video that's like, I don't know, it's like 40 minutes, but you can put it on double speed and it reads just fine. So you can get through it in about 20 minutes. But he goes through a really good human buffer. Like he has a bunch of people line up and he shows them move through and explains Bufferbloat and all of its unfortunate side effects. And then talks about how kind of the FQ Codal, I think a little bit about how FQ Codal and Cake can, or maybe less about Cake, but how they can actually improve things. He even has a Patreon I saw. And he basically says, hey, help support me in, writing this code and going and talking to people about it. So that was pretty cool. So if you guys are...
Invite him on the show, Greg.
I don't know why they didn't occur to me. Let me make a note. I'm sure he would...
I've talked to him. I've actually talked to him in the past, and he seems like a really friendly guy. So.
Oh, yeah, he's really really entertaining for sure.
And that would probably be an episode for me to not partake because I'll probably piss him off just because I'll be like, it doesn't seem like that, like it's never seemed like that big of a deal to me. Like it always seems like the people that go on about it seem to be like religious zealots, and it's just like that's the only thing that matters is fixing Bufferbloat. Oh, it is 1% over what it should be. Oh my God, the world is ending. And then it's like, well, I mean, there's plenty of evidence that the exact opposite, too small of buffers, is just as bad, if not worse. So it's like, it's good to have.
It just solves a lot of problems that are outside of your control. So you can't control buffers in other people's networks or size of pipes or anything like that, and it kind of it minimizes the effect of that, and it can make a big difference for people in consumer connections, like WISP connections that are like only 10 meg, and they're trying to watch Netflix and the kids are playing games, and it solves all of those problems.
Yeah, it'd be super useful in kind of an MDU scenario too, where you've just got a lot of people all jammed to a single pipe.
Oh yeah.
So
sounds like you have experience with that.
A little bit, yeah. So yeah, I'm definitely keen for the new protocols to hit Router OS. Of course, I'm not going to jump to version 7 beta to test it out. I'll let other people do that because I'm not that crazy. But that, I mean, I think isn't. I think stuff like PreSeam and some others, isn't that what they're doing? Like FQ Codal and Cake.
It is. So they're using FQ Codal and they're tying it in with various other pieces of information to effectively centrally do that, which is quite cool. A lot of WISPs I know of are using it.
Yeah,
and
give
love
you a
it.
lot of really good information, right? Like it presents it all very easy to digest way. So
That's an important piece too. It's like it's not going to replace PreSeam. Like it's a nice tool, but I mean, they have extra experience as part of the service. Like the integration that they have with their box into like the billing systems and stuff is, I think, worth it. But yeah,
That's right. At first I had the same question, Nick, but after I'd seen both of them, I was like, yeah, Mikrotik adding Cake and Codal is definitely not going to replace the likes of PreSeam. Like they add too much value on the history and the reporting side.
Yeah, I mean, I see it making some impact, but not being the end of the road. You know, 'cause
It'd be
there's
supplemental.
some people that's like, and like, well, but like, you know, I see some people, it's like, you know, that's what they're looking for was, you know, FQ Codal and their Mikrotik guys. And so if Mikrotik does it, be like, you know what, you know, not everyone will see the value in all the other stuff that they should.
and they're also looking at
but-
like PreSeam is working on like multi-homing, like multipath and stuff that I don't think you're going to be able to do with just like running it on Mikrotik. So there's
Sure.
definitely a place for them, and I don't think it's going to hurt them, but
Sure.
maybe put it on home routers.
So
Just turn it on.
that brings me onto a topic that we've mentioned several times but never discussed in this is Router OS v7. So I mentioned earlier there's now actually MPLS support in it. So I was quite surprised. It came out a lot quicker than I thought it was going to. I haven't had a chance to test it. I've had a quick look at it, and it seems like they're just trying to, even though the routing engine in version 7 is capable of a lot more, at the moment they're just aiming to expose similar features to version 6. So a lot of those long-standing feature requests, like fast reroute for MPLS, you can't see that they're there. That doesn't mean they're not, but they're just not exposing it at this point. The other thing I did on the latest release is I had a really good look at the way the BGP filters work, and I was both horrified and pleasantly surprised at the same
How
time.
does that work?
So all the BGP filters now are basically like a if then, or like an if matcher and then a then action. Okay, so it's become more like scripting. But they have basically got types, so it's type sensitive. So you need to define whether the value you're matching an if against is a string or a numerical value. So they've got stuff like that in there, and it's kind of makes it really hard for newbies to learn this stuff. Like I've got a background in Java development and stuff like that, so I kind of knew what it was and what they were doing and could understand why. But the thing is, this is not a full-fledged programming language. It's just it's just routing policy language. It's got to be a lot simpler. So while I could see the huge benefits of this, like it's going to give you a lot more control. You can do things like take a metric from OSPF and automatically push it into a BGP metric and do a find and replace kind of action there and inside one policy. The complexity added is quite high from it, and the room for error in your routing policy has increased by the way that they've done it. So I'm not sure if they can automatically match the type of the value that they're trying to manipulate or match on. Or if there's a reason for them doing it this way that I've missed, that's entirely possible. But yeah, I just see it being quite a steep learning curve. I'm sure that when it is added into Winbox, that there'll be some sort of policy builder there, and that will certainly help. But at the moment, from the CLI, it's certainly quite daunting.
Yeah, you'll probably just have to open the Mikrotik app on your phone, and it'll have a little wizard, BGP wizard.
Maybe.
I look forward. I mean, I do look forward to having to learn all of the scripting stuff because it's just, you know, too many new things to learn. You know, with version 7, you know how they're changing all kinds of stuff. But I do look forward to route filters working.
Not buggy and leaking stuff that's not supposed to, and
Yeah, because I have a BGP session that I have yet to be able to successfully turn up because I can't get it to not leak routes.
So when I saw the way that they've done it, it reminded me of Bird. I don't know if any of you have used the Bird routing daemon, but it effectively has a similar kind of almost a scripting language. And then what it does is when you restart Bird or you pull it, tell Bird to pull in the configuration, it actually compiles it to some sort of machine function. And I'm guessing that RouterOS is doing a similar thing because it means that it can process the filters a lot faster. It doesn't need to interpret them as it goes. So I'm guessing that's why they've done it. Yeah, but it would be nice if they could automate out the types a bit more for the end user.
That makes me wonder. Like I went to Cisco Live one year, and I was doing an ASA workshop that they had there, and this guy that was in front of me was like one of their top ASA guys. He wrote all the exams, and he was basically telling us how stupid we were. So I was like, oh, okay. And he was like, you guys, what happens if we do this and this? And everybody's like, that's something you would never do. And he was like, oh, you guys are dumb. You don't know this? I was like, yeah, I guess I am dumb. But anyway, he told me that TAC's official response is that, like, if you're trying to do configurations inside the ASA, that ASDM, while it was terrible in Java and everybody hates it, that was the GUI was the official configuration method. So they said, do it in here. And if you've ever tried to, manipulate all of that craziness inside of the CLI, you'd understand that. I wonder if it's going to get to that point with their route filters. Is it like something that's so complex that they're really just going to say, hey, use Winbox to configure this thing?
Maybe.
Which I'm okay with, so long as you have, I guess, Winbox parity with WebFig, I guess. If you're going to force people to use a GUI, it's going to be good.
Yeah, the rest of the RouterOS version 7 outside of the new routing, it's just like RouterOS version 6. It's not really any different. It's just this part that's changed. And I'm sure if you don't like something in particular and provide them with legible feedback rather than a big rant, they'll take it on board. Yeah, so. But
so then,
I'm kind of excited.
Should we consult our Irish friend for how to give effective feedback to Mikrotik?
I mean, he kind of like waved a flag and was done with it. It's moved on.
I can understand that response as well. Yeah.
Oh.
Sorry, Thrift, go ahead.
It's pretty time consuming. It's like going through all this stuff. I mean, when I was working for an operator and we relied on Mikrotik, I was happy to burn a couple of hours every day kind of looking at new features and trying new operating systems to see what bugs there were. But when your livelihood doesn't depend on it so much, you just want it to work. Yeah, so some of the features that come out and they're buggy, I kind of get a little bit annoyed by now, and I can understand Tom's response.
Yeah. Most of my interactions with Mikrotik is I've got it in these specific environments that I have it working, and I'm okay. It's I don't have as much time to experiment and play with that stuff anymore. Now I'm trying to it's like I've got this thing that I can do and this thing, so I just I keep bouncing around to those other things.
It's funny, like over the years, there's all these people that have come across in the ISP circles that really don't like Mikrotik, and they're like, oh, you should use Juniper and Cisco everywhere. And it's like, well, tell that to the wireless ISP with 300 plus pop routers. Is he going to go out and spend, $20 million replacing
even just
them all?
Power? I mean, like, the ISP that I'm currently with, it's like 50 plus pops, and probably 85% of them are solar only. So that's not going to happen.
No, it's not. So there's a real reason why people use Mikrotik and why they are so important to the WISP industry.
I think they're awesome. That's always my go-to, because I can think of, if I'm looking at Cisco or Juniper, how to configure something, and I can do that in a fraction of the time on Mikrotik. I can knock out that same config so quick, and then I have all these extra tools that are in there. But you can't, unfortunately, use it everywhere. That's why whenever you...
I think that's where That's where a lot of people's frustration comes from. Like, I've worked with countless ISPs that have grown their business using Mikrotik, and they get to a certain size where they need to go to something like Juniper, and they just really don't want to because they love the user interface and everything that Mikrotik does. So.
Oh, sure. Yeah, and that's kind of a segue into one of the topics here. Over at Midwest IX, we recently upgraded one of our routers. We had a popular x86 appliance.
Look at you being all diplomatic, Mike.
Running.
Where's this come from, Mike? This is new.
Running CHR and we started to have performance degradation at about. Well, so this router is not what's running the IX. It's the gateway from the cache boxes that we have that are not able to be directly on the IX. And performance would start to degrade about 7 gigs in terms of packet loss and things like that. And then it would just never do more than 10 to 11. And we for a while I tossed around about what options do we do. I love the Mikrotik interface. I love to be able to do all the things. It's like I just love I hated to leave it behind. But we looked at, even if we got the latest and greatest version of that network appliance, it's only 2 to 3 times faster than the one we already have. So how long will that last us? We could build a dedicated server, throw many cores at it, now we're getting into, territory. It's like, not many people push that much throughput with it. And so finally finally made the decision to move forward with converting it over to a Cisco switch with some light layer 3, because we only, after you drop some of the big networks that don't connect to the cache boxes anyway, we're only 500, 600, 700 routes. Which fits into most any layer 3 switch fine. And once we did, that day was a bit of a mess because, we're having to migrate everything over. But that next day, our exchange had more than double the overall throughput, having the new router facing the cache boxes. We went from just under 20 gigs daily peak to over 45. From upgrading the one router to something hardware based. It sucks that I don't have Winbox anymore, but it's just amazing to have something that works at that sort of throughput. And
it's working now. You don't need it.
Still got to monitor and watch logs though.
Definitely.
And to know that performance will be, I don't have to wonder where the limit is. I am kind of wondering what the limit is as to the number of routes that it can hold, but I don't have to wonder as to the throughput that it will do. It'll do it all. If you can plug it in, it'll route it. So that will never be a concern again for us. And earlier there was mention about, kind of doing, incremental steps. First you do this. On security stuff, I think it was, first you do this one thing that's really obvious. And then once you get that down, then you move on to the next and the next. Making a change like that kind of inadvertently caused us to do some of that too, because when you more than double your throughput in a 24-hour period, you start to find all the other areas that weren't quite living up. And so right away we filled up the 20 gig lag between two data centers. So then the next day we upgraded to 30 gigs. Filled up again that next day. Problem being is that we have no more channels on the WDM infrastructure that we have. So we can't upgrade that again yet. But good thing we already started discussions with the people whose dark fiber that we're using. We're gonna basically replace everything that we have with a new, passive DWDM system. And our intention was to just, use a 1310 port to, to pass 40 gig channels through. And, but when we pass 40 gig channels through, we kind of, I was looking at the traffic patterns that we've got now. And if we're filling 30 gigs right now, the 40 gig channel is not going to be enough. I mean, you're still, it's what, 2/3 to 3/4 is really when you need to be upgrading your connection again. And so we're already at 2/3 before we even turn up the 40 gig link. So we're having to do 100 gig. Kind of working through the, how we manage that. And we found some, 100 gig, 80 kilometer optics, fiber store. They were $10,000 each. One optic costs more than both switches on either side of the link. So it's not exactly a viable path. So kind of poking around at what things are out there, and someone messaged me about a company called Inphi, INPHI. Never heard of them before. Got to looking at it, and they actually make 100 gig optics in a QSFP28 format that will occupy a 100 gigahertz standard DWDM channel. So you can put as many of them in there as you want. Well, I guess 40. It's not really all that you want, but you can put 40 in a standard passive system.
More than I want. So
Did you get a price on those things?
When he was looking, they were very reasonable. He said that it still 5 digits, but less than 5,000 an optic. And I'm like, and they're 80 kilometer. So 100 gigs, it just occupies one channel on the 40 channel system. So I can put in 39 more of them. Now that was a couple-year-old data, so I have to re-engage them to figure out current pricing and things like that. But that was kind of the, I can't think of the right expression, but with a passive WDM system, you're limited to single lane optics, 1 gig, 10 gig, 25 gig. And traditionally 40 and 100 use 4 lanes each, so you can't run them through like that. These guys seem to have solved that.
That's interesting.
And
they're headquartered in San Jose and Singapore.
And the thing, as I dug further, is that who really seems to be behind this isn't Inphi themselves, but Microsoft. Microsoft was looking for a more scalable solution to metro bandwidth, through existing WDM systems and whatnot. Moving to this, I think they said they were able to reduce power consumption by like 75% in their optical gear, and much more simplified. And they went on to develop a whole open line system. I think they've contributed to Open Compute project as well. It's got something to do with their transoceanic cables as well. But these hyperscalers, they got a ton of money, but they also have a ton of bits they have to shovel around, and so they look for ways to save money too. And so then I thought, okay, well, this has got to be some one-off stuff that's only going to work in white boxes or whatever. And what's interesting to me is that they actually list Cisco, Juniper, Arista part numbers for these optics. So the big vendors embrace it.
That's awesome. Well, hopefully...
probably because Microsoft said, you support this or we don't buy your stuff, is probably what I'm guessing.
Probably. Well, hopefully come back with some numbers. Let's see what happens when the rubber meets the road on this one. We are pretty much at the end of the list, and I think we got to get Thrift out of here. He's got a fancy dress birthday party to go to. I hear you're going to be a crayon. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely.
What color?
Mate. No, it's actually Sunday here, so I've got a family lunch to go to.
You and your family, whatever that's about. All right. Let's go in reverse order. Andrew Thrift, if people out on the internet want to get a hold of you, would they just send you a message by crow? Because that's what it sounds like. Sounds like you're being attacked by birds.
Definitely by crow. We've got plenty of crows here. They'll arrive in no time. But yeah, LinkedIn is the best way to get hold of me.
All right, rock and roll. Nick Arolano?
I guess you could go to ario.cloud, say hello, or the obviously the WISP, Brothers WISP group.
All right, rock and roll. Mikey?
ario.cloud. That sounds new. Is that new?
I've had it for a while. It's just nothing on it right now.
I've had it for a little bit. No big deal.
Might be blogging on there soon.
Oh, rock and roll, finally.
Yeah.
It for me, I'm still busy, so leave me alone.
All right, for me, you can find me at greg@gregsole.com. If you want to email me, you can go to my blog, gregsole.com. You can go to patreon.com/brotherswisp, throw us a couple of bones, and find me in the Little Brothers Wisp Slack. I'm pretty responsive, especially if you direct message me or tag me. You at me at stuff. I'm pretty snappy about that. I guess if you guys have any questions or comments or other guests you'd like to see, I'm going to email Dave and see what do. He'll probably do the thing, and then if he agrees, then I'll say, hey, you should talk to Nick Braulio as well, but you talk to him after you talk to us for sure. All right, thank you guys for joining. Thank you, Andrew, Nick, Mike, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, let me go and find the button where I can stop.
Know what you are missing. Ideas and some good comedy given. If you missed the show already, don't worry, you're forgiven.